Hi guys, and welcome to a topic video centered around some things that happened in chapter 852, but in no way limited to actually talking about this chapter because as easy as it would be to do a review, I actually feel like much of the chapter does speak for itself, and if there's anything, like any part of the chapter you really want to discuss, just leave a comment and we'll do that. But I actually want to make this video about something completely different because I know I won't have the time to actually make this video at any point in the week because I am in the middle of doing exams, and I planned it so that I could do this one day, just take this one day out of my exam to do these videos. So I won't actually have time to do this at any other time, but I really want to talk about this. And the reason that I haven't done before was because I did plan to do it, and then we got the chapter where Brooke and Big Mom had their little exchange of words, and I thought that Brooke said everything that I wanted to say because when the lines come from Oda, he doesn't really need arguments to support those claims because he's the author and we should always trust what he says. However, even with what Brooke said, and you can probably see where this is going, people are still very skeptical, and I don't want to dictate your thoughts about this arc or about Sanji, but it makes me sad that people who claim to be Sanji fans, which of course you can't be Sanji fans and not like this arc, but it makes me sad that people are like, Sanji's acting out of character, this is not at all what I wanted from Sanji, this year of Sanji was crap, this wasn't the year of Sanji at all, and I really want to address that because I think you are wrong, obviously, as I have said multiple times. And originally what I'm going to say here was actually a reply to a comment, but because what I had to say was like it was 6 pages in a Google, like in a Word document, I wasn't allowed to post a comment because it was too long. So this is a response to someone else, but don't feel like I picked you out because I wanted to like say that you're wrong. Like a lot of people said the things you were saying, you were just the first one to comment on that video that day, like today. And I know a lot of people have been very disappointed with Sanji and very disappointed with this arc, and I don't fully understand it. If you understand Sanji's character, I don't understand what you have against, like what you don't like about the way that Sanji has been portrayed in this arc, which is why I want to start this video off by discussing Sanji's character. And I've been thinking about this for a while, to make this some sort of series, because I really like talking about characters and like analyzing them and doing some like character introspect. So this is gonna be part of a series. It's just gonna be part 1, I guess, where I talk about Sanji and his character, and because this is all tied in with this chapter and just in general people's thoughts about the year of Sanji and just Sanji in general, I think it's gonna be a bit of a mashup between like some character introspect and why I think that it is wrong to dismiss Sanji in this arc, and why I think that, of course, the arc isn't done yet, but I think the year of Sanji was actually the best thing that we could have gotten from Sanji's character, because if you know me at all, you know that Sanji's one of my favorite characters. Like, of all time, he's in my top 5. In One Piece, he's my 2nd favorite character. Only, like, Luffy is my number 1, and, I mean, Luffy is simple, but everyone loves Luffy. And I just thought that this arc and this year of Sanji has been really amazing, because when it comes down to it, the best way to show what a character is made of is to break them. And that is what Oda has so masterfully done in this arc. And yeah, before I just lose you completely, I'm just gonna go completely analytical and just spell out exactly why I think this arc has been really good for Sanji's character, and just some other things that I feel like people could have not gotten. Because another thing, just before I start, is that people don't understand that one of Sanji's core character trait is just that he's a kind person. And people, one person told me in my, I think it was my review, a live reaction of the last chapter I did just before New Year's, that they were quite impressed that I had gotten that Sanji was a quite kind character, because Brooke said in that chapter, as I referenced in the beginning of this video, that Sanji is a kind character, he's kind of self-sacrificial. That's why when they came to this island, they were prepared for the fact that Sanji may just marry Pudding, because he didn't want to cause any trouble. He didn't want to do something that could be, like, that in his mind would be selfish, so they prepared for that. And that's why it was so important for Brooke that they got this poneglyph, because if Sanji ended up staying behind, even though they didn't want him to, if he did end up doing that, it was important that they still had something to show for their efforts, that them coming to Whole Cake Island and suffering this much wouldn't have been in vain, because Sanji would no doubt he'd blame himself for their suffering if they came for him and he ended up not coming back for them. Coming back with them. And I thought that when Brooke said that about Sanji's character, people would finally understand that yes, Sanji's core character trait, one of them at least, I'm gonna talk about the other one in a minute, is that Sanji is kind and self-sacrificial, and he's literally one of the kindest characters in this entire series. That is the entire reason why he's been acting this way, but people are still mad at Sanji for acting this way, mad for not seeing Mr. Prince, which I'm also going to talk about. So yeah, that is why I've been waiting this long to talk about this, because I thought people understood it with Brooke, and I really hope that people, just one or two of you, understand that Sanji is not acting out of character, and that Sanji is definitely not untrustworthy or his character has been ruined or anything, because when it comes down to it, this arc has been really, really good for Sanji, and that's what I want to get across. So now let me get into the video. Okay, so as I said, I'm gonna start off just talking about Sanji's character, because that is what this video series was initially going to be about, talking about characters. And also, as I've said, people aren't fully understanding what kind of character Sanji is, or at least the way that I see Sanji, which I feel like has been proven that I have been proven right in this arc, especially with Brooke's speech, because I have always seen Sanji as a kind character, but that's not all there is to him. There's a lot more to him. So let's start off with what Sanji's core character traits are, because people love talking about core character traits. And it's important to differ between character traits and core character traits, which I will get into, but just let me talk about the core character traits of Sanji. And for me, there are two things that define Sanji as a character, and one of them is of course that he's very kind. And I've talked about this at length, both in this video and in other videos. If you follow my anime videos, which I'm really sorry that I haven't put any content out for that for like 3 weeks, but exams, I'm really sorry. You'll know that just in the So arc we just see Sanji being really kind, and I comment on it a lot that Sanji is just this really kind character. And I've had a couple of discussions with you as well with Sanji just being this kind character, so I know that I'm not the only one who sees this. But Sanji also has another core character trait that I think is very important not to forget, and that is that Sanji is a person who always acts on strong moral principles. He has a lot of them, and we all know them because that's what we see when we think of Sanji. That's actually what defines him. He's a person who only fights using kicks because he can't use his hands as a chef, because the hands of a chef are the most precious thing they have. He doesn't hurt women because, as we know now, Seth told him not to, but that's a strong moral principle he always acts on, and even in the face of danger, he will never hurt a woman. Like, Khalifa tried to kill him, turn him into a fucking soap bubble, whatever the fuck, I don't even know what to call it, and he did nothing because that would act against what he believed in, that a man should not hurt a woman, however sexist that is, but I still love Sanji. Sanji always feeds the hungry because he knows what the feeling of starvation is. He almost died because of starving, and even if he knows that this person will kill him, or at least try to kill him if he feeds them, he does it anyway because that's what he is, that's what kind of person he is. He always acts out of these very strong morals that he has, no matter the consequences, even if he's hurt, no matter like what, especially not if he's hurt, because you need to remember Sanji doesn't really care that he's hurt. He doesn't really care that much for himself, which I will get into later, because that's another very important thing to remember about Sanji, that he really doesn't care too much about himself. He's really, really selfless, and that's important. So I want to talk a little bit about these strong moral principles, because they didn't come out of nowhere. He has these morals because they came from somewhere, and because he has the feed the starving because he had an experience like that. He has the women and the don't fight with your hands things because Seth told him to. One of them because Seth told him that as a chef, you have to not use your hands for anything other than cooking, and with the women because Seth was like, men should just not hurt women, that's the one thing that they should never do. So Sanji has these character traits because of some old past experience that he's had, but it's important to remember that just because someone has past experiences with these things, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will turn out like Sanji. Another person in Sanji's stead might not have turned out the way that Sanji did. Like, imagine if someone else, imagine if Doflamingo had been starving, like had a near-death experience because of starving. He's not a person who would turn to, oh my god, I should always feed the hungry, right? We know this because that's actually kind of close to what happened. So why did Sanji turn out like that? Why did Sanji think that, okay, so now that I have experienced this horrible, horrible thing where I almost starved to death, why is it so important to me that I would go out of my way to feed people who will try to kill me if I help them out? Because Sanji is a kind character. The strong Mother's principles is directly tied to the fact that Sanji is a kind character. And that's, again, important because when it comes down to it, the one character trait that Sanji has always had with him, confirmed by Reiju in this chapter, is that Sanji is a very, very kind person. And according to Reiju, he is kinder than anyone else. So another really important thing to remember about Sanji is that despite the fact that he's a really, really kind person, Sanji himself, in the first many years of his life, he didn't really know kindness. He wasn't exposed to a lot of kindness. The only people who were really kind to him were Reiju and his mother. And in the case of his mother, he didn't get to see her a lot. She was cut off from him, the other part of his family, and she died, and like, it was there, but because the love and kindness came from someone who was related to him by blood, and was just like, it was someone who he could rationalize away the kindness to the fact that they were mother and son, just like he could see that Judge treated his other siblings really well. Like, he could like make that connection that the love that he got, love and kindness he got from his mother, was conditional because they were blood. Which is what Sanji does question later in the beginning of this arc. Actually, he questions if children should see their parents in a holier than light or something, because just because someone is blood related, does that mean that they have to love them? And does that mean that you have to do anything for them? That's what Sanji is kind of struggling with a lot in his childhood, and while he isn't really struggling that much with it at the like where he is now, he still feels some sort of connection to at least Reiju. And that's another thing, because the kindness he came from Reiju, where with his mother he could really suspect that, like, he could only suspect that the love was conditional, which of course it wasn't. With Reiju, he knew that the love and kindness that he received from her was conditional, which is another thing that might have made him suspect that the love and kindness he got from his mother was conditional, because Reiju made it quite clear to him that while she did help him and did think that it was unfair that he was being bullied, she wasn't going to help him, because if she did, she would get bullied as well. And this is nothing against Reiju, because she was a child. She would have been afraid to be treated the way that Sanji was, because like, she was still a child who could live up to the expectations. So why should she go out of her way to suffer with Sanji when she could just not suffer? She's a child, she doesn't know any better. And even if she's smart, like, we can't really hold this against her, even though I kind of really want to sometimes. But it's important to note that Sanji he doesn't really know what unconditional love and kindness looks like until he meets Seth. Because Seth shows him unconditional love and kindness, and that's something that Sanji can't wrap his head around. And I've talked about this at some point, I feel like, because when Sanji and Seth were starving on that island, and Sanji came to Seth trying to steal the food that he thought he had left, and found that, well, he didn't have any food left, and to survive he had eaten his own legs, Sanji just does not understand why Seth would do a thing like that. Like, this is something that is so far-fetched for Sanji. Like, he really does not understand this. And while they are strangers, yes, it makes a lot of sense that Sanji wouldn't understand why Seth would do this for him. But Sanji, very clearly in this piece of their history, he's like, what did I ever do to deserve this? He really does not understand this, because he doesn't understand when something is unconditional. And yeah, Seth does explain this by, I did this because we had the same dream, the all blue. But I also think that this comes from the fact that Seth is also a kind person, and because while it is rare to find people who are looking for the all blue, and that was like some kind of light that Seth saw in Sanji, Seth would not have saved Sanji if he wasn't kind as well. And that is what Sanji is slowly learning from Seth, that love and kindness can be unconditional, but he still struggling so much with that in his mind he rationalizes this for a favor, which is why when we meet Sanji for the first time, he does not want to leave the Verity because he feels like he has a debt he has to repay. He feels like he cannot leave Seth until his dying day because Seth saved his life. And because the love and kindness that Seth has shown for him this far must be conditional, because they have the same dream, because Seth expects for Sanji to support him and support this restaurant they've built together, Sanji just doesn't understand that Seth wants him to be happy and that Sanji does not need to repay this weird debt that he's invented in his own mind. Sanji just doesn't understand that. Sanji is not a character who quite grasps the fact that he is loved and that kindness and love can be unconditional. At least not given to him, because the thing about Sanji is that he gives his own love and kindness unconditionally. We see this with his crew and the way that he sacrifices himself for them time and time again. But Sanji doesn't grasp the fact that this thing that he does for other people can go both ways. And I will go a little bit more into that, but it's very important to understand that Sanji just, because of the childhood that he had, he lacks this basic understanding of love and kindness, where with every other character in the Straw Hat crew, most of them, with the exception of Frankie, I believe, they all came from a place where they knew love and they knew kindness. Robin had her like scholars who really did show her that love and kindness, and that was also what she ended up clinging on to when she had nothing. She clung on to Sal's words about someday you will find people who will treat you. I don't. It's bad that I don't know the quote. And Nami had Bellemere and Nojiko and like all these people in the Straw Hat crew, they had someone. Chopper is also another exception, but he learned kindness, unconditional kindness from Dr. Hildebrand. But yeah, people like Frankie and Chopper have moved past this idea that love cannot be unconditional, but Sanji hasn't quite, and we know this because that's where his character stands, and where his character starts off in the beginning of the series, and because we have not had a character arc focused on Sanji and this struggle like we had, especially with Chopper and with Frankie. Sanji hasn't grown past this point. Sanji hasn't grown past the point where he thinks that he can be loved and people can be kind to him unconditionally. So with that in mind, it's important to understand that Sanji always believes that the role that he fulfills in the Straw Hat crew, while they all do like each other and love each other and all that sappy crap, Sanji has a very distinct role. He is their chef and he's also one of their top fighters. But it's important to remember that both of those roles are, as far as Sanji is concerned, replaceable. You can always find a cook and you can always find someone who can fight. This is not something that should be too hard to do. But because Sanji quite efficiently ticks off both boxes, and like very efficiently, he's a very good chef and he's a very strong fighter, there's really no need for him to feel insecure about his position at the moment. Until now, that is. One thing that Sanji fans, and just generally One Piece fans, have been kind of annoyed by with everything that has happened post-time skip is that Sanji has seemed to be the butt of many jokes ever since the time skip, and he's just not shown the capabilities in the fighting area like he did before the time skip, and we all know that Sanji has it in him to be a very, very strong fighter, and we really haven't seen that because in Fishman Island, everyone just breezed through that. Like, it wasn't even a challenge. Luffy took half their enemies out with Haki alone, and he could probably have taken the other half just by himself if Zoro hadn't been, okay, we want to fight too. Like, really, Luffy, really. And then comes Punk Hazard, where Sanji's only real opponent is Virgo, and he loses because Virgo is that strong. If you doubt that Virgo is strong, remember that it took the team of Smoker and Law to take him down. And in Dressrosa, the two things that Sanji probably remembers from their time in Dressrosa is that He ran off, got seduced by a woman. When he finally tried to do something, aka stand up to the flamingo, he wasn't strong enough and he had to flee to Seoul with half of the crew to just keep them safe because he wasn't strong enough to do that by himself. And then comes Seoul. They find this country that is completely in despair, and as soon as the first threat appears, Capone, Sanji is forced to separate himself from the half the crew, just the crew that he's with, because he can't protect them. He's not strong enough to protect them with just his kicks. So he has to go along and let himself be kidnapped and try to figure out how to sort the situation out by himself. So, with that in mind, you should know that Sanji, just as much as us, is frustrated with the fact that he hasn't done anything of value in this arc, because just as many of us readers tend to overlook, Sanji has done good things. Sanji has done many, many good things. Just because he hasn't kicked ass doesn't mean that he hasn't had any value. But he has. He's done it, like, Punk Hazard, he helped Kinemon find, like, his body and stuff. He helped organize the Marines so that they could all escape together and most of them could make it out of the poison gas thing alive. In Dressrosa, he actually helped the part of the crew escape, and while for him it could, and for us, it's like, okay, so you couldn't even, like, do anything noticeable, like, anything good in this arc. But you need to remember, again, he was up against the Flamingo, what could he actually do? And when he finally, like, when Law and whoever took care of the Flamingo at that point in time, Big Mom shows up, and what can they do then? Like, what could they actually do? It's not like they can fight Big Mom, because at this point in time, they're not exactly aware that they are actually having a war with Big Mom. Like, we all know that Luffy declared war against her, but it hasn't been a pressing issue that Big Mom is after them up until that point. And you need to remember, the Big Mom pirates were after them because Sanji was there, not because Luffy declared war against them. So, for all intents and purposes, if they started to fire against Big Mom, they would create an enemy that they did not need because they were currently trying to pick a fight with Kaido instead. And really, no matter how you look at this, it's just not a good idea to start a war with two Yonko. They cannot, no matter what, both take on Big Mom and Kaido at the same time, which Sanji is painfully aware of, both in Dressrosa, in Seoul, and in Whole Cake Island, and that will be important later. So with all these things in mind, let's look at the current arc, because with all the things I just said, you can take away three things. 1. Sanji's a kind and selfless character. 2. Sanji acts on strong moral principles. And 3. Sanji isn't exactly in the best state of mind because he's frustrated at the fact that he hasn't really done much of anything of value, just like we are frustrated that he hasn't gotten his time to shine post time skip. And this then all builds up to the fact that Sanji cannot do anything in this arc that he himself would regard as selfish, which then, just to bring back 852, is exactly why Reiju by the end of this chapter is like, Sanji, get your shit together. These people are amazing and you'll never find anyone who's just as amazing as they are, so go be selfish and be with them because that's actually what you want. But just to top off all of these things that Sanji has going on currently, when the arc starts, Sanji has a number of threats hanging over his head that just limits his actions a lot. And of course, with this chapter, a lot of these things are taken away, and I understand completely that people are quite annoyed that all these things got resolved so quickly, but then again, they had to get resolved. Some of them were kind of empty threats anyway. But that's a whole other topic that I won't get into. But just when we start off the arc, the threats are very, very real because Sanji really doesn't know any better. Like, he doesn't know that there's a grander scheme going on behind the scenes. So Sanji, in the beginning of the arc, he has his hand cuffed with explosives, so that, for himself, that's not a good thing. There's the threat to Saf, which, again, in Sanji's mind, he cannot let anything happen to Saf because he still has that debt to repay him, and he's still, like, even if he didn't have that, he wants Saf to be safe, of course. There's no way he wouldn't want that. And there is the threat of the Straw Hats being hurt and killed, because even before they came to attack Big Mom, if Sanji was to go against this marriage, the Straw Hats would inevitably become enemies of both Big Mom and the Beansmokes, and because, as I just said, they have already picked a fight with Kaido, they cannot afford to have 3 enemies of this caliber against them at the same time. That's just not a thing that's possible for them to deal with, no matter how strong Luffy or Zoro or Sanji is. And yes, they do have their grand fleet and they have all this good stuff, but to be fair, Sanji doesn't really know this. And again, the grand fleet would, they probably don't even stand a chance against Kaido's army, and we're really lucky that we have the Minks and the Samurai to back us up, because Luffy's army is probably strong, but it's not strong enough to throw down an emperor, and least of all to end the nation of the Germa. And Sanji is very aware of that. So let's just pose a question. In Sanji's situation, what is the best action what is the best thing that he can do to ensure that everyone is safe, completely disregarding himself? It is of course to sacrifice himself, let everyone be as happy as they can, and make life as troubleless or just not as troublesome as it could be for the Straw Hats, because even though it's not like the Straw Hats have an easy life, they are pirates, but Sanji can spare them from 2 enemies that they cannot deal with at the moment by sacrificing himself. And that is something that Sanji is very ready to do, because he's a self-sacrificial and kind character who would do stuff like this. And here comes the first counter argument, because I hear you all screaming, Mr. Prince, Sanji is a very smart character who could outsmart his opponents and blah blah blah. And yes, I understand this, because I did the same thing. I made a 20-minute video talking about why Sanji could pull the Mr. Prince card and outsmart everyone. So yeah, I understand this argument, and I'm not mocking you for having this argument, but I just think that at this point in time, it's stupid to dismiss the fact that Sanji has more than that side of him. And as I said in the beginning of the video, it's important to remember that there are differences between core character traits and character traits. And for me, the core character trait of Sanji is of course his kindness and his strong moral principles, and a character trait, simply a character trait, is that Sanji is this smart character. And while I would really love for him, just in general, to see more of that, I'm sure we will see more of that, but it is not at the core what Sanji is. When Sanji breaks down completely, what is left of him is not that he's smart, but it is that he is kind and he acts with strong morals. And just to the Mr. Prince argument, it's not like Sanji didn't try to play it smart. He did try, he told Luffy as much. He weighed his options and he ended up concluding that sacrificing himself was the better option, because the further he came into enemy territory, the more threats were hanging over his head. In the beginning, it was just whatever what the Vito whispered in his ear, which was probably most likely the Seth thing, which would of course would make Sanji act. When he got a little further in, there was the prospect of the handcuffs and a little bit of trauma, as we saw when Ichi and Nichi arrived. And then when Luffy arrived, there was the imminent threat that the Straw Hats might be in danger, which is why he struck the deal with Big Mom and all of those things. So just when he went further and further into enemy territory, things just looked darker and darker for Sanji, and he just ended up concluding that with the power that he currently had, he couldn't do anything to stop Big Mom from doing or for carrying through with this wedding. So Sanji decided that sacrificing himself was a better option, because there was no way for him to outsmart anyone in this situation, because he wasn't free to do anything. One wrong move and he would blow up his hands. One wrong move, the Straw Hats would die. One wrong move, Seth would die. Everything that Sanji did was limited, so sacrificing himself for others' happiness was really the only thing that Sanji could do to be true to his character. Other people have pointed out that, yeah, okay, so if Sanji is this ready to sacrifice himself and just play into the enemy's hands and all that stuff, why the F is he talking back to his family? We see this, he's very, very angry when they spill food, they hurt women, they do things that he doesn't really agree with. And this goes back to those strong moral principles, which I will keep coming back to those principles, because if we read that scene where they're all having that really lovely family breakfast in the German kingdom, we can see that Sanji, he's really not having the time of his life here, but he doesn't say anything, he just quietly sits there, listens to the conversation and eats his food as he's supposed to do. And it's literally not until Sanji notices that Nietzsche will not finish his plate that he speaks up, because Nietzsche, you should finish your damn plate. We do not waste food. That's a wrong thing to do. Because one of Sanji's moral principles is not wasting food, because starvation. And then later, when the head chef, Cassette, comes in, and Nietzsche's like, this food is trash, and then throws the plate at her, of course Sanji's gonna act, because that's another one of his core principles. Men should never hurt women. So of course he acts, because when it comes down to it, Sanji will always act on these things. Even if he is giving himself into them, he's not gonna lose sense of who he is, which is a person who acts out of kindness and out of these morals that he holds very dear to his heart. So another thing that people have been really annoyed with is that it seems like Sanji has zero faith in Luffy, because Sanji could just have put his faith in Luffy, that Luffy would come and save him, and then everything would be happy unicorns and rainbows and all stuff like that. You can see where I'm going with this, right? So let's answer the question, does Sanji have any faith in Luffy? The answer is, of course, yes. Yes, he does. He does have a lot of faith in Luffy. Not the arc, but where Sanji's character arc starts is around the time when the Capone comes to Zou. And one of the first things that Sanji says in that conversation inside of Capone's castle is, Luffy is the man who will become the Pirate King. Now, that sentence right there is a sentence that a lot of characters in this manga have said. And if you're like me, if you're anything like me, and I'm guessing that 90% of you thought this, the two most memorable characters who said this line is Zoro and Usopp. And for me especially, it's just always Zoro. When I think of the line, Luffy is the man who will become the Pirate King, I always think of Zoro. And why is that? That's because when Zoro says that line, it's a very memorable moment. He says it in a situation where he's about to sacrifice his own life to save Luffy. And it's just one of the most impactful and powerful scenes in the entire manga. And that's very important to remember, because why would Oda draw this parallel between Sanji and Zoro, or Sanji and Usopp? Because yeah, it's not too far-fetched to think that every Straw Hat believes that Luffy will become the Pirate King. That's their goal. That's what they're sailing towards Raftful. So why is it important for Sanji to declare this? For him to declare it in a moment where we all instantly think, oh my god, that's just like Zoro did, that's just like Usopp did in Alabasta. Why is that important? It's important because it's a parallel to Zoro or Usopp. And Zoro and Usopp, Zoro, for me, really, is just the character who is the most dedicated to Luffy, who's the most loyal to Luffy, who's always there for Luffy in thick or thin, and he has the most faith in Luffy. So it's important to remember that Oda didn't draw this parallel just for the heck of it. He did it because we all know that Zoro has this much faith in Luffy, and by Sanji mirroring Zoro in this way, we all instantly know that Sanji has the same kind of faith in Luffy. And it's important that we start the arc of Sanji off with that faith, because we shouldn't doubt it. We shouldn't doubt that it's there. And all the things that Sanji does later does not mean that he doesn't have faith in Luffy. So that just brings up the question, why doesn't Sanji trust that Luffy will save him from this mess? Sanji's whole world has shattered before him, and he's seen time and time again that Luffy can take a person who's broken this much and build them again and just give them a place to be. Why doesn't Sanji trust that Luffy can do the same for him? It's very, very simple. If you've been listening to what I've said this entire video, you know the answer as well. Because at this moment in time, Sanji doesn't want to be saved. He doesn't want Luffy to come and save him. Sanji wants to sacrifice himself for Luffy and the others so that the people that he cares about can be happy, because that is what Sanji is. That's like the whole point of his character. And the thing is, we've already seen Sanji do this once before. When Sanji was offered to join Luffy's crew, he really, really wanted to, but he declined because he thought that he had to stay with Seth until someone, aka Seth, then forced him to go along. He didn't do it because, he didn't stay because he wanted to, he stayed because he felt like he needed to. And it is the same in this situation. Sanji doesn't want to be saved, not because he doesn't want to be with Straw Hats, but because he feels a need to stay in this situation, to suffer, to keep them happy. Sanji's the kind of character who would set himself on fire to keep others warm. And I just really like that metaphor, which is why I said it. And this is just the thing with this. What Sanji does has nothing to do with trust. It has something to do with the fact that he's just trying to sacrifice himself for Luffy. And another counter-argument is just that, well, if Sanji trusts Luffy, has faith in him, why doesn't he trust that Luffy can get him out of this and everyone will be happy? And this is the thing, because you cannot use this argument alongside the argument that Sanji is really smart. Because, as I said, Sanji already weighed his options. He already saw that, logically, there's just no way for Luffy to save him and keep everyone safe, especially Seth. And let's look at the fact, Luffy has on his side, including Sanji, he has 7 people on this island. And I'm not talking about Jinbei because they don't know that he's there until this fucking chapter. And I'm not talking about Caesar because they can't really trust him. It's just the Straw Hats, Carrot, and Pedro. No one else. They are deep in enemy territory as they enter Whole Cake Island. In Big Mom's territory, the Vinsmokes are right there, and Sanji has 0 freedom to move around. So, like, logically, Sanji can't see a way for them to all escape and all be happy and all be free and all be safe. This just again goes back to what I said about Sanji's decision in Dressrosa. He can't let the Straw Hats have another Yonko to fight because they have already picked a fight with Kaido, which, in case you you forget how important that is when it comes to Sanji, Zoro continuously pointed it out and so that they have a big problem called Kaido. And a lot of people just found that really rude of Zoro to just dismiss Sanji like that and say, well, Kaido is a bigger issue. But no, Zoro and Sanji are actually at a wavelength here because Sanji agrees with Zoro. Kaido is a big, big issue, and they cannot be allowed to take their eyes off him, because the moment that they do, they are screwed. And trying to fight Big Mom and the Vinsmokes at the same time would be taking their eyes off Kaido, and that's just not a safe or smart move. And then the next question, why the heck would Sanji then beat up Luffy? Like, what's the point of that? Isn't that just disrespectful, and it just gets them nowhere, and it's just really stupid? And you can probably guess that I don't really think that. To understand why Sanji does that, you just have to look at what kind of person Luffy is, because Luffy is a very straightforward character to understand, and we can look at Luffy and we know that when it comes to Luffy, the best way for Luffy to understand something is through actions rather than words, and that's exactly what Sanji does here. He uses his actions to try to communicate what it is that he wants Luffy to understand. And it's important to remember that Luffy isn't against this way of communicating. He isn't against Sanji beating him up, because you need to remember that Sanji time and time again tells Luffy to just step back, and he won't do this. Like, just leave the island and you can just, we don't have to fight if you just step back. But Luffy does nothing. He just takes blow after blow, allowing Sanji to deal this damage to him. And, it's important to remember that Sanji is really acting under his captain's permission when he is beating him up, because, as Luffy says later, it's not really him who's hurting, it's really Sanji. And it's just important to understand that Luffy does get what Sanji is trying to communicate here. He really understands where Sanji's coming from. Again, as I said, he understood that Sanji's the one in pain, even though Luffy's the one who's being beaten up, because Luffy understands in this moment that what Sanji is trying to do is that he's trying to push the Straw Hats away, sacrifice himself so that they can be happy. And what Luffy then does is really, really fucking genius, because he then plays Sanji's game. He says, okay, if you're going to sacrifice yourself for us, I'm going to sacrifice myself for you by going on a hunger strike and sitting in this very spot and telling you I cannot become the Pirate King without you, because you need to understand that at this point, Luffy, who's a very good people reader, he's probably come to the same conclusion that I have, that Sanji isn't quite, he isn't quite understanding that love can be unconditional, and that Luffy does love him unconditionally, and that he will try to save him from whatever unhappiness he is about to inflict upon himself. Which just makes the scene where Sanji is crying that much more awful, because he understands what Luffy's doing. He understands that Luffy is now trying to sacrifice himself, giving Sanji no option of really going along with this, because Luffy has now said, well, if you don't come back with us, I will die. So it's around this point in time that you probably need to understand that Sanji's mind kind of shatters you. Like, it's really important to understand that after his exchange with Luffy, he's really broken. Logic has kind of gotten out the window for him, like not completely, but he's not really rationalizing that, okay, so Luffy has said that if I don't go back to him, he will die for me, basically. Sanji's still, like, he's still struggling to see that the best course of action is for him to try to communicate with Luffy and try to tell Luffy, okay, this is the situation, please come help and save me. And then we can work this out somehow. Because the thing is, Sanji's still aware that they're the handcuffs and they are stuff to worry about. That is why he cannot, in the situation, go back to Luffy and just like spill everything. But he doesn't also understand that he probably has the power to somewhat communicate with Luffy in some kind of situation. Like, he probably could do that, but instead what Sanji does is that he continues to try and sacrifice himself. So he strikes a deal with Big Mom that Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats will be allowed to go free after the wedding has commenced. But what he also does is to make sure that Luffy will actually leave when they are set free. And the way he does this is that he wants to prove to Luffy that if Luffy were to leave him behind on this island, Sanji would be happy, which is why he proposes to Pudding, which is why he goes out of his way to really, really like Pudding and fall in love with her. And it's why, as I said time and time again, whenever Sanji talked about Pudding and how much he liked her, I always said it felt very forced, because that was what it was. What Sanji wanted to do was to prove to himself, to prove to Luffy that even if he was no longer Straw Hat, Sanji would still be happy in his situation, because Sanji trusts that what Luffy is after is not for Sanji to be part of his crew. Like, as much as he wants that to happen, Sanji knows that what Luffy really is striving for here is for Sanji to be happy, because Sanji knows what kind of person Luffy is. And just as Brooke said, they were anticipating for a situation where Sanji would be left behind, because he could end up being happy in this marriage. And like, that's just the thing about Luffy, that he's also a kind person, although it's different from Sanji's, which I will probably talk about whenever we get to Luffy's character video. But for Luffy, he's a kind of person where you need to earn his kindness, but once you have it, Luffy will do anything for you and he will make sure that you are as happy as you can be, which is why Sanji knows that if he can prove to Luffy that he is happy in his situation, Luffy will actually leave him alone. And it's also just important to remember what I said like 10-15 minutes ago, that Sanji does believe that his position in the crew is replaceable, because in his mind he's the chef and he is the fighter, but you can easily replace those roles. And because he's seen himself as a failure, as a warrior or a fighter through the whole time after the time skip, and he's constantly been told by his father and just the rest of his family that he is a failure, Sanji just doesn't have the self-esteem to think of himself as an important part of the crew, even though he knows that they all love each other. But again, he just doesn't understand this unconditional love that the crew gives him, at least not yet. And just to back up this claim that Sanji that he still doesn't get this unconditional love, do you remember what he told Pudding when they were in that room and he proposed to her? Sanji told her that 13 years ago his life had been hell, but these past 13 years he'd been happy, he'd seen light, and he'd been in paradise, whatever the fuck he said. But in that speech, when he told her how happy he'd been and he was kind of okay with going back to hell as long as he had Pudding, of course, he never said anything about not feeling like a failure. Like, he never said that, in my past I always felt like a failure, but being with the Straw Hats I saw another part of myself, or something like something very sappy as that, which Sanji probably could have said, but he never does, because he's still of a mindset that he's not really there yet. Like, he maybe doesn't think of him, like constantly think of himself as a failure, but he's not over that either, because you need to remember that for the first 7, 8, 9 years of his life, he was constantly told that he was a failure. And that can do a lot to a person's mindset. And that's why what Reiju tells Sanji by the end of this chapter, like, that he's not a failure, that's why that is so important, because Sanji needs to hear that. He needs to hear that he isn't a failure like he's always thought he was. And then there are all these people who call Sanji untrustworthy, which I, for the life of me, don't really get, but let's be honest, when we look at what Sanji has done this entire arc, even though he's been trying to cut himself off from the Straw Hats, he has been telling Luffy exactly what he wants to do this entire arc. When they meet up for the first time, Sanji does say that, hey, I'm a prince and I'm going to go through this wedding, so please just leave. Like, he tells Luffy exactly what he wants, and while he does conceal a lot of these things behind lies, like, oh, I never trusted you, I never believed that you could be the Pirate King, and I always looked down upon you, and blah blah blah. Luffy calls him out on this bullshit immediately, because the thing is about these lies, they are not set up for Luffy to believe them. As I already said, it was set up for the Beansmokes, for them to know that they can manipulate Sanji to do stuff that he doesn't want to do. But it's also a message to Luffy about, okay, so even though I don't really want to go through with this, I have to. You need to let me do it because this is actually what I want, even though I don't really want it, but I want to do it to save you. So yeah, as you can see, people have a lot of complaints about the year of Sanji, Sanji's character in general in this arc, or just like these past many years, I guess. And while you're perfectly entitled to think all these things, it makes me a little sad when people dismiss the year of Sanji as a crap year of Sanji, because in my opinion it was literally just such a great arc, because as I said in the beginning of the video, the best way to show what a character is made of is to break them. And Sanji was broken in this arc, and the arc isn't over yet. We have yet to see him pull himself back together, rise to the challenge and kick some ass, which he will. But the thing is, this arc isn't all about kicking ass, it's about Sanji's character. And that's why I think it's a little sad that people have just been wanting Sanji to kick someone in the face. Because yeah, it'd be really fucking awesome to finally see Sanji have a proper fight where he wins. But this arc is just about so much more than that. And really, I really hope a lot of you, if you didn't understand that before, that after this very long video you understand it, because I think it's really important to know that Oda can draw and tell stories that aren't just about great adventures, but also about just characters. Because ever since 2016 started, we followed Sanji and his emotional journey, and we revealed parts of his past and just started to learn more about where he came from and why his character ended up this way that it is. And we're just beginning to understand why Sanji sees the world the way he does, and why he has this weird understanding of himself that isn't, like, he isn't this arrogant bastard that he can come across sometimes, maybe. I think maybe he's done that one of the times where he comes off as really arrogant, but he isn't really a character like that. And the thing is, this arc has been very emotional, and it's like in stark contrast to the arcs we've had previous to this that was very, especially with Dressrosa, that was so heavy on the action and just the general storyline, and with everything before this, they haven't been as emotionally focused as this arc we've had this time. And yeah, we still have other storylines besides Sanji's going on. We have a Yonko involved, we have a kingdom involved, we have mentions of the Reverie, we have players from all around like Jinbei, Caesar, Capone. Like, Sanji's storyline definitely isn't the only thing going on, but it is the most important thing because he is a main character. This is his character arc, and there was a point with Oda saying this is the year of Sanji because he wants to draw the attention to the emotional journey that Sanji is going through in this arc. And this arc, as I've also said a lot of times, this isn't a redemption arc. Sanji doesn't need to redeem himself. This is an arc where Sanji just finally understands that he's loved and accepted, and this is an arc where Sanji truly just develops into the person that he can become, where there's nothing holding him back anymore. Because so far, the thing that has been holding Sanji back the most is just the fact that his self-esteem isn't as high as it probably should be. He doesn't think of himself as highly as he should. And that's what this arc is going to do for Sanji. And with this chapter especially, where Reiju is just like, go take your life in your own hands, be with these amazing people because you deserve it. That's the turning point for Sanji. That's where he realizes he's not a failure. He should be a little selfish sometimes and just take what he actually deserves instead of just sacrificing himself to try to keep other people happy, and he should know that other people loves him as well. And even with all this, I understand that a lot of people who read One Piece are in it for the epic fights and the world building and just like all the epic things that goes on, but sometimes I think it's important to know that Oda can do stories that are different from that. Oda can do more focused stories. Oda can do stories that are focused on a single character, and that is more emotional. And I think the reason that a lot of people tend to overlook all the emotional aspects of this arc is because we're looking for all that world building. We're looking for all the things that tie into other arcs and things that will just be really relevant in the future, not just for Sanji but just for the storyline in general. So we tend, or other people I guess, tend to overlook the fact that this is an emotional journey and not just a journey that will, or a story arc that will be really, really relevant for the future of the story, which again, it probably will. Like, we have all these big players, but the core of the arc is still Sanji, because that's what Oda told us from the very beginning. He told us, this is the year of Sanji. We need to pay attention to his character development and what Sanji is going through emotionally, and we need to see him fall to rise again. And just lastly, before anyone tries to compare this to Enies Lobby Along Park, I see there are similarities, but if you really truly think that this is the same thing, you're really missing the point here, because the arcs are so different. For both Nami and Robin, the threats hanging over them were like immediate threats that you could literally touch. Like for Nami it was Arlong, for Robin it was more abstract, it was the world, but it was like the enemy that they faced were things that Luffy could punch away. Which is why this arc is so different, because as I said not too long ago, the inner demons, like the things that Sanji is struggling with here, is not the actual enemy. It's the fact that he doesn't understand unconditional love and kindness, and the fact that he looks down upon himself, and that it is his own inner demons that are holding him back. And that is what this arc is about. It's not about this outer threat of the Beansmokes, because as it stands right now, they don't really seem that big of a threat as they did in the beginning, because in the beginning they were this really big threat because Sanji made them out to be that, because in his mind they were these horrible, horrible monsters, and the way that Sanji reacted to them made us think that they were really strong. And I still believe that, of course, yeah, they are strong, but when it comes down to it, they're probably not as strong as Big Mom is or Kaido is, because this is all from Sanji's mind. He's traumatized by the experiences he's had with them. The demons that he deals with are internalized. They aren't things that Luffy can punch away for him. That is why this arc is so different from Along Park and Enies Lobby, and why it makes more sense for Sanji not to trust that Luffy can really save him the way that he saved Nami and Robin. Because how the fuck can Luffy punch away Sanji's inner demons? It doesn't work like that. It's different, and that's why this arc for me has been this good. Because everything is more than what it seems. The threats aren't things that Luffy can punch away. It's what I said with Seth as well. They can't really ensure Seth's safety because he's on the other side of the world. And for me, that's always been what this arc has been about for Sanji. Like, the threats hanging over him have always been something out of reach. They can't really do much about these threats, which was why Sanji has struggled so much with allowing himself to be saved, because the things that he would lose if he was saved, it would be too much for him. But just to end it off, I don't believe Sanji has been acting out of character. I believe that he's been acting very much in character, and that this journey that he's been on has been really great for him, because it will allow him to grow out of the things that has been holding him back, and he will grow as a stronger person. And when we see Sanji after this arc, he will have been a stronger person, and we will get our Sanji will kick someone in the face and blow them into oblivion moment. But that's really not the core of the arc. The core of the arc is Sanji's emotional journey, and when he comes out on the other side, he will be stronger emotionally. And I hope that this video let some of you understand just what this arc is about, at least from my point of view. Of course, you're free to disagree, but I just think that it's so important to keep these things that I've said in this video in mind, because, as I've said so many times before, Sanji is one of my favorite characters, and one of the reasons that he is my favorite one of my favorite characters is because of his kindness, which is what this entire arc is built upon. So yeah, I will end this video here. If there was anything in this chapter you actually wanted to discuss that wasn't Sanji, feel free to leave it in the comments below, and we can discuss there. I don't know how much content, One Piece content, I can put out this week because of exams. I will be done the 16th, so from there on I plan to do some more videos, and because we're also on break I will probably do some bonus videos. If you want more of these character analysis, feel free to leave a character. For now I'm just gonna start with the Straw Hats for One Piece. You can also leave other main characters from other series. I would be really glad to talk about Bakugo from Boku no Hero Academia because I feel like his character is very misunderstood, or other characters from this series that I review. So yeah, if you want a character analysis, which I really love doing, feel free to leave a comment. They won't be as long as this video, I promise. It's just because there was a lot of things tying in with the Year of Sanji and people's complaints with this. But I'll probably keep them around 20 minutes long. But yeah, for now, if you like anything that I had to say, you can leave a thumbs up to the video, leave in the comments below what you thought of this chapter, and if you want to see more, you can subscribe. Until next time, bye.